Hello, and thanks to you all for joining us today for what promises to be an informative and an enlightening discussion of how a strong database learning analytics solution can enable colleges and universities to proactively identify, understand, and act on student behavior and performance, empowering the right students at the right time to achieve greater success. We're pleased to have us as presenters today on our panel. Dave Johnson, Director of Research and Analytics at Colorado State University, Joseph Mildenhall, CIO at Grand Canyon University, Amin Kazi, Founding CEO of Unizin Consortium, David Valancourt, Chief Academic Officer at the College of Healthcare Professions, and Manoj Kade, Vice President and Managing Director of Sales and Client Services at Barnes & Noble Education LoudCloud. Dave Johnson leads the efforts at Colorado State University to build learning analytics capacity across the institution. He supports assessment and educational research for the university and is responsible for directing IT, analytics, and instructional design for CSU Online. Joe has been serving as Chief Information Officer at Grand Canyon since September of 2009. He has more than 18 years of experience leading the design, development, and deployment of large online education environments, as well as student and faculty internet portals, supporting the rapid growth of the online campus at Grand Canyon and University of Phoenix. Amin is the founding Chief Executive Officer of Unizin, a university-owned consortium focused on the evolving world of digital education. The Unizin ecosystem consists of essential and strategic capabilities that serve emerging diversified teaching and learning models at its institution. As I mentioned earlier, Dave Valancourt currently serves as the Chief Academic Officer for the College of Healthcare Professions based in Houston, Texas. He has held academic positions with several online colleges and worked as an e-learning consultant for companies across the USA. He currently studies predictive analytics for online learning. And as well, we have with us today, who will be moderating our panel, Manoj Kade, the co-founder and former CEO of LoudCloud. He has extensive experience in education technology and currently serves as Vice President and Managing Director of Sales and Client Services at Barnes & Noble Education LoudCloud, which offers innovative solutions in learning analytics, competency-based education, and learning management systems to address the key challenges of affordability, accessibility, and retention in higher education. Just a reminder before we begin, you may post a question for our panel at any time during the presentation, and we'll try to answer as many as possible at the webinar's end. Also, an archived version of today's presentation will be made available later for viewing at your convenience. And now, here's Manoj.
Thank you, Mark, and a very good day to everyone. Prior to registration, all attendees were asked to respond to a couple of questions. Here's a slide and the survey results. To respond to the first question, does your institution currently have a learning analytics solution? The majority of the registrants today seem to be in the early stages of either considering or implementing analytics within their institution. We're lucky to have a panel that comprises a mix of both public and private colleges and also a leading industry consortium, and they too are at different stages in their analytics implementation life cycle. So I'm looking forward to a productive conversation and hopefully some fireworks and debate and certainly learning more from everyone. So with that, let's start with the first question. What challenges drive higher education institutions to consider learning analytics as a potential solution? Let me preface this by a couple of remarks. According to the National Center for Education Statistics, those students that enrolled in 2008, seeking a bachelor's degree at a four-year institution, full-time students, only 60% of them completed their programs. In selective institutions, it was about 89%, but for institutions with open admissions policies, it was a very low 36%. So the question also here is improving student graduation the biggest reason to use analytics? Let me start with Joe Mildenhall. I know that you've been tasked with implementing analytics at Grand Canyon University for quite some time. So can we start with you?
Sure, and thanks, Manoj, and it's a pleasure to be on the panel this morning. I think the primary driver, for Grand Canyon, I'm sure most education institutions, is just that we're increasing our focus around how do we help students be successful and provide them the support they need. And we're going through a transition where, because we're adopting more and more technical solutions to different parts of the education process, we're collecting more information. But that information, because we've got one solution for our student information system, another one maybe for our learning management system, we have customer relationship management, housing systems. We have all these systems, but they each have their own silo of data, and often the real power is by combining that information. And so that's why why we're being pushed towards learning analytics is we know we have this information, but if we look in each one of the silos, we really don't get enough of a picture to take to understand what's going on. And so the process of pulling this data together into a analytics platform and then start analyzing it across this is where we really start to develop the power. So I think it's just that, because we're adopting technical solutions for a lot of things, we have the data, but it's how do we combine it together so that we can start to really study it and understand it and then start to take actions for our students.
Great. Dave Johnson, do you want to?
I appreciate that answer. When we think about learning analytics at Colorado State, we have been actually thinking about maybe even splitting up the term. So our CIO says I should be thinking about both academic analytics and learning analytics. And when he makes that distinction, academic analytics, we're talking about first-year persistence rates, whether or not our freshmen complete their first year and do that successfully, or graduation rates, or even the success of certain programs. And when we start talking about learning analytics, we're talking about what's happening in courses or in a series of courses. How learning analytics, this wealth of digital information, can help us determine just what our students are learning and whether or not they're taking away those, that key knowledge and those key skills that will help them be successful not only in their majors while they're at the university, but in whatever they choose as a professional career, or whether that means more education.
Well, that's helpful. Let me pop into the second question. What does a successful analytics implementation look like? And I want to preface this by, when we look at analytics lifecycle, we see it from 4 different lenses. And we could think of this analogy of crawl, walk, jog, and run. When you think of crawl, I'm reminded of Samuel Coleridge's line, water, water everywhere, not a drop to drink. There's a lot of data, as Joe mentioned earlier, but how do you collect this data? How do you wire this into a single system? And do you, as an institution, have access to clean and high-quality data? Are you in that cycle? Walk for us, when we think of walk, we think of insights, your rear view mirror. Do you have the tools that can provide you insights into, are you meeting your institutional or academic goals? How are you progressing towards that? When we think of jog, we think of prediction. Are you using data modeling to predict the ability to meet goals? And then finally, when you think of run, we think of how can you use data and these insights and predictive models, et cetera, to improve your underlying processes. What's wrong? How are you using analytics to take action to impact outcomes? So let me start, Amin, with you. I know that across your consortium, you have some great universities. They're probably at different points in this life cycle. Do you want to talk about how you see the challenges of implementing analytics?
Yeah. So I think what you and Joe and Dave said is accurate. I think the first challenge that people have in terms of getting successful analytics implementation is around getting the right data from the right systems in the right way. And from Unizen's perspective, we really think that real-time or near real-time data is going to be very important. And also, like Joe was saying, sometimes the data will be from the usual suspects. It'll be from the SIS or it'll be from the learning management system. But what we're also seeing is that data comes from other unique places as well, and that data is usually not very clean, like you were saying, Manoj, and how do we bring all that together? So once you have that clean data and you move on to insights and predictions, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about that. But I think the biggest thing that we see when we work with our members, and from my prior experience, is really it's about the people. It's about having the organizational management and the change management processes to make the necessary changes, and things that include having simple tools that people are happy and eager to use, having alerts that provide actionable recommendations, having a feedback loop to test and refine models. And this sounds really simple, especially in a higher environment, but I think there's also some educating people on how statistics work. So just because something has a probability of happening doesn't mean that you just throw up your hands and you walk away. So it's really about the whole people and change management process. So what Unizen is doing is we're focusing on two fronts. So one is what you talked about, sort of focusing on the data, the models, the insights, and then the actions. But then secondarily, we're working with our members to really make sure that we're understanding and we have a consistent change management process in place as these tools and solutions start rolling out.
Thanks, Amin. David Valancourt, I know that getting the right data, especially near real-time data, was a challenge for you. Do you want to talk about your experiences here?
I'd be glad to, Manoj. Yeah, I'm very much in agreement with many of the statements made earlier. The change management component is a large part of it because we've got these siloed systems that were identified earlier. The barriers between these disparate systems, bringing the information together and having it in a format or a schema that will allow us to work with it as one set of data was the biggest challenge that we had with the pilot program we tried last year. Extracting data from these disparate systems that sometimes do not provide that extraction capability in a very elegant manner, but they often are quite challenging. And getting the data out in a format that's usable with the others was our biggest challenge. That being said, as the data comes out and as we were able to get it, the collection and formatting of the data from the disparate systems is kind of that first step. The jog and run components that you identified, using that data to analyze it in a statistically sound fashion, not just looking at correlations and the like, but using it in a statistically sound fashion to make predictions and then get the changes implemented within the organization to enable the action items and the improvement is a quite challenging part of it as well, and success would be when you can get that done.
Joe, you have implemented analytics for a long time at Grand Canyon University. You guys have been clearly very successful in doing so. Would you share the process that you went about? And also, if you can talk about some of the interesting experiments that you're doing with collecting data in classroom and other live situations around beacons, etc.?
Sure. We very early on understood that we needed to consolidate the different systems that we had information related to our students centrally, and so we started creating the replication and transport mechanisms to make that happen in a near real-time situation. Once you've got the data together, then you can start to examine relationships, and we've done a lot of experimentation around that to come up with some triggers that we feel like that if give us some insight into an intervention point, that if we can provide the student the appropriate amount of encouragement or counseling or tutoring or whatever at key points, that helps them helps their their ability to be successful in a particular course or in their program. And so we've been refining that over the years. And, a lot of that's based on fairly mundane facts like level of engagement in the online environment, frequency of posts, grades on the assignment level, and things like that. But, as we're expanding beyond that, we're doing some interesting experiments really more around two things. One is around in capturing more engagement points at our campus here in Phoenix, and we're experimenting with the beacon technology where it's using Bluetooth, low-power Bluetooth, and so through the use of the application that our students have loaded on their phone, we can actually and with their permission, we can actually tell as they're participating in certain activities. We have a chapel every Monday morning, and we provide some academic credit for students that want it for attendance at that chapel. And we used to have a complex process of scanning ID cards and everything. Now, just as they walk into our arena, that participation is logged because they come into contact with a beacon. That's logged in the cloud, and then we bring that back and analyze it for attendance. And we're expanding that to say what other student activities can we do that same process with. And it's, because one of the key factors we see is that if students are engaged in campus life and in community, then they're more likely to be successful and have a great experience. And so that's one of the experiments we're running. We're finding that's the more we do, the more we see the opportunities for success there. But we're trying to do it in a real respectful way so that students know when they come in contact with the beacon, they know what attendance or other transaction we've collected with that beacon. That shows up on their phone at the same time that it's being transmitted to us. And so doing some exciting things and expanding it in this coming academic year.
Truly fascinating. We would like to share results with you of the second question and the survey results for that. The question was very simple. What do you see as the biggest challenge to adopt learning analytics inside your institutions? As you can see, the majority of you seem to indicate that financial constraints are a big reason. So I wanted to tease up this question out. Is it that we have not been able to communicate effectively the impact of, let's say, student retention or improving outcomes vis-a-vis the cost of implementing analytics? And the The corollary here would be, what are the internal barriers that you see inside your own institutions to getting the analytics initiative underway? David Valancourt, shall we start with you?
Sure, that would be very good. Yeah, I think I would tend to agree with the majority of the folks that the economic component is a primary consideration. That being said, I'm not sure that it's a matter of not having the money, but how do you reprioritize? How do you show the return on investment in a dollars and cents fashion and in a performance metric for the university and for the students individually? That return on investment, the runway, how long is that runway, seems to be a very big question that composes, at least from my experience, the majority of that hesitation based on the financial resources. The ability to get the word out and that long-term plan that will put together the steps required to take a campus that has multiple disparate systems and a lot of spreadsheets running around that people are sharing and using pivot tables on, etc., to pull the data into a warehousing situation where the data is uniform, close to real time, and certainly if it's not real time, that it is aligned properly. For instance, one of the problems we had when we were beginning to implement was the ability to get data with a snapshot of the same time. You don't want to be looking at those disparate systems data from different time snapshots. And so that was another challenge for us. So I would say that the return on investment being conveyed across the organization as part of that change management, and then the disparate systems providing a fairly lengthy runway to that return on investment are two primary ones that we experience.
Thanks, Dave. I mean, across your Unison consortium, how do you get individual institutions to adopt analytics faster?
Well, I think it's the same way you get anyone to adopt. You have to make it valuable to them. So what Unison is doing is we're working with our member institutions to build tools and solutions that are easy to use. So when we do visualizations or we do dashboards, making sure that they're really, really simple, and then also useful. So having information and data that actually benefits students or faculty or advisors. So there is obviously a lot of this, like other people were saying, the change management problem ends up being part of it. There's obviously a legal perspective to how the data is collected and how it's managed and handed off. But I think primarily if the solutions are both useful and easy to use, the adoption is relatively straightforward. And I think that's why there are a lot of solutions out there that are aiming to do that for universities, because doing this, growing this, seems to be a challenge from like David was saying, from the economic component of it is a challenge. So there has to be it has to make sure that the return on investment is there for students and faculty.
Thanks. Joe, rephrasing this question somewhat, what should you not do as an institution that could derail an analytics implementation?
I'm not sure, not do's the right thing. I think the key thing is just what's your focus, and and what's the institution's goals, and I think that my impression is that there is still a significant opportunity to provide information based on what I'd consider fairly low-hanging fruit related to data. Some of the biggest gains we made in retention and student success came from fairly simple data points, like in our learning management system, just gauging the level of student engagement based on their posts, their kind of the minor assignments leading up to major assignments and things like that. By measuring that, and then just thinking that students should be engaged X times per week, and if they weren't, triggering an action so that a counselor or appropriate resource followed up with them and just provided some encouragement, had tremendous results in our student success, particularly for our online students. And so I think focusing on, if you launch an effort and then get way out into some of the more theoretical questions first, you could end up spending a lot of time and university resources and not have a lot of concrete results. So just maybe balancing, the real far sided analysis with some real practical applications of analytics, I think is helpful.
Thanks, Joe. That's a good segue into the next question. When I think about wider adoption of analytics, how do you market analytics, even for institutions that have embarked on this journey, or some that who have not? How do you get consensus to make these investments? And a related question: who should be the executive sponsor to advance analytics inside institutions? Should it be the CIO, like you, Joe, or a provost, or the CFO, for instance, in an institution? Dave Johnson, can we start with you?
Yeah, that would be great. Thanks. This is a great question, and it's been a big challenge for Colorado State as we think about this. As I think about getting all stakeholders, and I'm talking about administrators, faculty, and students, to adopt analytics into the culture of education across the university, I really think that it can't be just a top-down kind of approach. So a friend of mine said it best. He said a university is a federation. I mean, you have all of these relatively autonomous entities, our colleges, our upper administration, and they really, when they collaborate on projects, they effectively get things done. And when they don't, when one of those entities tries to go off on their own and build something rather grand, and analytics is rather grand, then it often doesn't go very far. And so at CSU, we've been thinking that we need to take the approach of it needs to come top down. And so we have support from our provost, Rick Miranda, and our CIO, Pat Burns. But then we also have support from key members of our faculty, key members of our staff. And if we could switch to that slide I gave you, Manoj, I could talk a little bit more about that. So our approach is both top down, it's bottom up, probably even from the side. And so this slide represents how we decided to drive analytics at the university. So we already have institutional research. They have a very strong history of working with our students' data and providing reports for decision making, and so that experience is key. We have a very robust Center for Learning and Teaching. We call ours the Institute for Learning and Teaching, or TILT. And they support all kinds of student success programs, from instructional design all the way to tutoring or learning assistants or the training of learning assistants for different kinds of large enrollment classes. Then, of course, there's my office, and I serve as sort of the functional lead for learning analytics at CSU. And then finally, we have a very key part of this collaboration, and this is a center, an officially recognized center at the university called the Center for the Analytics of Learning and Teaching, and it's run by a friend of mine, Dr. James Folkstad, who works in the School of Education. He's got a group of faculty that are discussing learning analytics, and they're also participating in small-scale research projects, and that drives up interest. So really, the learning analytics at CSU is not going to go anywhere if we don't have widespread adoption by faculty, and Jim's center is key in driving that interest. So the more that we can introduce faculty to learning analytics, the more that we can show them that it's useful in the way that they teach their classes, the more that we can show them that it might actually change the way they teach for the better, then we can communicate that value that David and Amin were talking about. Because we have success stories that can drive more of that institutional and cultural change. So that was kind of a long explanation, but
no.
I'd be happy to say more. But like I said, it's a top-down approach, and it's also a grassroots approach at the same time.
That's great. I mean, I know that you're probably trying to do this at other institutions or replicate some of the ideas here. You talked about ease of use. You talked about useful insights. How do you take this learning across the consortium as an example?
So it's very much the Unizin Consortium is very much about collaboration. So we have a lot of cross-institutional I don't know what to call them, working groups, I guess, that come together and they discuss these things. So Dave Johnson, for example, talks to his peers at other Unizin institutions about how they're dealing with local challenges. So part of what Unizin is trying to facilitate is the reduction in each institution recreating the wheel themselves. So obviously, the CSU model is not going to work at every institution, but it helps other institutions see what does work, and they can take their own ideas and move forward on their local campus. So the whole, like Dave was saying, there's a bottom-up and a top-down perspective, but then there's also this whole idea around, as a consortium, how do we collaboratively start discussing what areas of interest and determining how models can impact performance. So obviously some of the things that learner analytics will provide is changes to pedagogy. So if you are a biology professor at Colorado State University and you discover through analytics that certain types of learning methods lead to better engagement of students, which has been shown to lead to better retention and better grades, that's information that can be shared across the consortium. So really what Unizin is trying to do is use tools to make sure that we're using common tools and then facilitate these conversations across the entire consortium where it makes sense, of course.
Great. Quite a challenge ahead. Both Joe and David, I would like you guys to also pipe in. Joe, analytics has been instrumental in driving Grand Canyon's growth. How did you get, and you talked about small wins, low-hanging fruit and small wins. Can you maybe highlight how you saw the adoption of analytics inside Grand Canyon grow?
It was really in two phases. The initial and first serious use of analytics was primarily around our online-only students, and that was probably a little bit easier adoption, and because one, we use centrally developed curriculum and standard curriculum, and a little bit different faculty model for our online teaching. And so, there's a lot more of a culture of kind of watching that, watching student success and course success from a organizational level rather than more on the faculty level. And so that's where we developed a lot of the techniques around monitoring and measuring student engagement, and then triggering actions based on either changes in engagement level or dropping below minimums. We also monitored faculty engagement in those classes to make sure that we didn't have classes where faculty were going absent for a long period of time or taking too long to respond to student queries and those kind of things. So that was a little bit easier as our campus here in Phoenix has continued to grow in more of a traditional campus sense, and we began to work with the colleges and things about, well, how can we use some of the same learning in our campus setting, and it was different because faculty were teaching the courses based on their syllabi and their methods. And so, again, it was more taking some of the learning and then running experiments on in that traditional campus environment and showing the results, and then as those results show themselves, then expanding the use of that technology, and some of the things were as simple as organizing the process around reaction to midterm grades and and organizing the efforts to provide tutoring or faculty conferences with students that were struggling at midterm, and we started to see the positive results from that, and then we were able to add that if we have more granular assignment information in the learning and management system, then we can respond. And and again, like I said, a lot of the thinking now is that a lot of the student success is tied to their level of engagement in non-academic activities on campus, and are they feeling accepted, and are they enjoying that experience? And so that's taken us down the road of some of the social engagement measuring, but it is different, and I think what's been touched on earlier as far as doing small pilots, and then analyzing the success and then using that success to adopt it more broadly is really the way that you have to go.
Thank you, Joe. David, quick comment?
Yes. I would like to ditto exactly what Joe said. A lot of what he said was what we've experienced as well, faculty and student behavior, going after maybe the obvious low-hanging fruit. You don't want to outsmart your common sense in this kind of an approach, and I think Joe eloquently identified how they maintained that posture. One additional thing that we have found in our school, using some of those fairly large brush strokes, as in engagement time, accessing the posts or posting to the online environment, and the grades, we use in a very early identification of students that we feel may be highly at risk. And what we've done with that is the first 2 weeks of class, we have specific criteria that students need to meet, and if they're unable to meet that criteria by the end of the second week of class, it may identify, or at least we feel pretty confident that it identifies to us the student's readiness. Now, this is not cognitive readiness, because we do put them through an entrance exam, and we try to identify that they have the cognitive and academic capabilities. This has more to do with life circumstances because, like many schools today, we serve the adult learner who is oftentimes a full-time job, has a family, etc. And those folks, it's not purely an academic situation. So identifying that early on the behaviors that constitute successful matriculation through the program, and identifying students who deviate enough from those provides us with an opportunity to intervene. And sometimes that intervention is you may not be ready, and so we intervene with an advising session that allows us to get as deep into their purposes and their reasons for things as the student desires, and gives us an opportunity to help some, and for others, they're unable to proceed until they come back at a time when their life is organized enough to move forward. And that's helped us in some students haven't come back, others have gone back and done the do-over, if you will, and started again with a much better understanding of the demands. Their expectations are now set for success, and we're able to help them succeed. So, those fairly rudimentary data points give us enough information to intervene at as early as the first 2 weeks into their program.
Very helpful, thank you. Which brings me to my last question. It's a fairly still a nascent industry. There are companies that profess to be very strong technologically, companies that have great consulting skills, vendors that are very good at modeling. What do you look for when you are putting together an analytics initiative? What kind of skills would you want to look for? And maybe Dave Johnson, you want to start this?
Manoj, could you elaborate a little bit on what you mean by the skills that we look for?
Well, what I mean is, what kind of solutions, and what type of a vendor, based on your life cycle, are you looking for, or who can actually help?
Well, first of all,
partner with you.
Oh, that makes sense. First of all, I think we're looking with someone with a lot of patience. The university, we've done a good job in the past of collecting and using data for certain purposes, for federal reporting out of institutional research. But this new venture for us into learning analytics is relatively new. And in some cases, we haven't done a very good job of stewarding that data or any data related to learning in a way that would support, enterprise level and robust solutions for learning analytics. And so I think that patience is key. The other thing that we're looking for is some understanding of the higher ed environment, because whenever we do work on a pilot, where we institute a pilot or we implement some new system, what we're looking for is something that faculty across the spectrum can use, like from the STEM field to the humanities. And some vendors understand that really well. They want to help us with solutions that, like Amin was saying earlier, dashboards that are more intuitive, that display useful information in the simplest possible way. And vendors need to understand that as well. There are a variety of other things I could say, but those are the two things that come to mind immediately.
Thanks, Dave. Joe, any comments there before we wrap it up?
Well, I think in looking at that solution provider, I guess one of the important attributes to me is just their experience in the education environment. There are a lot of analytics vendors out there, and some of them take a very generic view to that data problem. I just find that the more background they have in education, the more they can start to understand the problems we're trying to solve and the ways that analytics can be used in our institutions.
Amin, some inputs from you?
Yeah, so it's funny. All the other questions were very, I don't know. I was more about the change management. This one, I'm very much part of what so I agree with what Dave said, but also I want to add that the provider that we look for, part of what Unizin looks for is solutions that are open or standards-based. Part of what we see is some vendors have their analytics solutions as black boxes. So universities, basically they ask a question and they get a response, but there's no reproducibility, which is really, really important if you're creating new data models. So something that's open, standards-based, something that's collaborative and supports the whole community rather than just focusing on a single class or college or department. So looking across the university, but ideally looking across the academy as a whole. And then finally, something that doesn't work in a silo, something that works with the student information systems and the learning management systems and all the other diverse and disparate data sources that are going to come out there. So those are some of the things that Unizin also considers.
That is very helpful. I just wanted to put in a slide here. At LoudCloud products, we always found that really recognizing what an institution is trying to achieve and going through that consulting before we go into the wiring of different subsystems, being very standards focused, as you said, and then finally providing some action-oriented solutions. So you make those investments, what results do you get from it? That was, completing that loop is very critical to ensuring a sustained analytics implementation and buy-in within the institution. With this, Mark, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Great. All right, thank you all for that enlightening discussion. And now, as Manoj said, with the time remaining, we'll entertain a few questions from our audience. Panel, this audience member wants to know, and I'll start with Dave, and then Joe and the rest can sort of chime in if you want to. Can you recommend an approach to use student data without abusing their privacy in a way a university can guarantee both their privacy and the ethical use of this data, especially when mining data about student completion rates?
Yeah, this is. We're handling this in a couple of ways. One is that we let students know that we collect data, so we're transparent as possible about that process. And actually, we've been transparent about that for years, even before we started working on building learning analytics here. So the other thing that we do is we make sure that we're in close contact with our IRB board. And so if we're doing, say, research projects or even larger scale analytics projects, we go ahead and we put those through an IRB process. A lot of them get exempted because we are using that data internally for business purposes. But the IRB wanted to, it was their concern that they wanted to make sure that we were following proper procedure. And even though they said that most of our studies would be exempted, it would cover us if we went ahead and went through the process. So the other things that we're working on just in terms of policy at the institution. So we're not only working on ways that we maintain data security, but also letting faculty and students know that we're keenly interested in the ethics of using data. So I see some questions about privacy, and this is a good question. So on the one hand, a lot of our students have participate in a lot of social media, so there's probably more about their personal lives out there than we could ever imagine. But on the other hand, we want to, I was going to say parent, but it's not quite parent. We want to look out for our students. We want to make sure that they have the right concerns about privacy. So as we institute these kind of these policy decisions about how we use data, we're also coupling that with speaking events, with trainings, to make sure that that faculty and students have opportunities to hear about and to discuss these issues.
Mm-hmm. Joe, this audience member wants to know, addressing to you, how would you see this type of data collection working in a professional program like pharmacy or nursing?
You know, we do have nursing programs. You know, I'd echo a lot of Dave's comments about the process you need to go through as you know, a lot of our analytics use is to, you know, interact with the individual student. So that data, you know, the data that we're generating is just for that direct interaction. As soon as you go broader than that, then you do get into the issues about, you know, how do you put it through the right review process and things like that. I think that the one thing about some of the more professional things is you can start to sometimes it's successful to gauge the success of your teaching efforts against the performance of students on some of the standardized tests like the NCLEX exam in nursing or things like that, that, you know, give you some very broadly accepted ways of understanding the level of your students' learning. But again, you know, we have to collect all that data. You know, the students voluntarily have to submit that. We don't go out and just see if we can farm it in mass, but that at least gives some real solid data points in the cases that you can pull that into your analytics process.
Thanks. We've had a number of audience members asking about predicting retention, whether there's a one-size-fits-all formula. I'll start. David, would you like to answer this? And Amin, you can too, from a larger perspective. What should an institution focus on or look for in getting information that will help improve retention and timely graduation?
The practice that we have found that improved our retention overall, all of the programs, and these were online only programs, but the practice that we found improved an average of 5%, in one program more than 10% within a 6-month period, was the practice of the early intervention, identifying the students who were engaged at the level of the criteria that was benchmarked earlier, that had the grade that was determined for that particular course, that identified a large gap in successful students and not successful students. And if we kept those thresholds toward the end of the second week, and depending on the interview and advisory session, took action to help them individually in very specific manners that were very customized for that individual, or did not allow them to pursue based on that advisory session, that was where we had the long-term gain in retention. That was the one, you know, if I had to narrow it down to one thing, that very early intervention was the one that did it for us.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, isn't the reality that the data doesn't matter, but it's actionable information that does? And isn't it important to present that information in a way that's understandable by all?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And the other thing that I would so there's you read a lot of reports and studies about how student behaviors leads to different types of student retention or graduation rates, and obviously there's the caveat in every statistical model that correlation is not causation. So if you start tracking how many discussion posts a student does, and that becomes one of the metrics by which you determine which students are going to be successful, there's a possibility that students will just start posting discussions, just just so their numbers are higher, not necessarily so they're engaged. So then that statistic becomes less meaningful or less useful. But you're absolutely right. It's about providing. It's not about making decisions. It's not about trying to automate how students learn and how you retain students. It's giving the right administrators and the right faculty and the students the right information so they can make decisions and change their behaviors themselves rather than just trying to determine one-size-fits-all algorithm that sets everything as a pre-written fate, basically. That's how we've been approaching it.
Mm-hmm. Dave, this audience member says, I'm interested in combining analytics, excuse me, with cultural analysis. Are university analytics directors interested in qualitative data?
Absolutely. The things that you can count, those I would want to say are easier to work with than the things that you can't. And I have a background as a qualitative researcher, and so that's a lot of the early assessment projects that I used to do. It was doing, coding of people's answers to specific questions or watching interactions in groups and forming conclusions based on that. I see a lot of potential for ways that we can use qualitative data, including, and I think of, the content of discussion posts in a learning management system as that kind of data, and also survey data to increase or enhance our knowledge of what we see in a statistical analysis. So I'm a big supporter of mixed methods research, and I see the possibility of doing qualitative analysis, the ability to validate or substantiate or strengthen the quantitative analysis that a kind of learning analytics system, as we're imagining it, would provide. Does that help?
Yes, that's great. That's great. Thanks. Manoj, what's the time frame for implementing such a system, and how much does it take in terms of human resources? Do you need to bring on a full-time employee to manage the system?
Yeah, that's a great question. It varies from institution to institution. What we have at LoudCloud, BNED LoudCloud, is an off-the-shelf platform that we can very quickly configure and pre-wire into existing systems, and that is licensed. And then we have a set of services that we provide, whether it is in modeling, whether it is in predictive algorithms, whether it is in custom integrations, creating data warehouses, etc. And it would vary based on the needs of the institution, the goals that they set, etc. But since the platform comes stress-tested with over hundreds of millions of records on a daily transactional basis, the costs are typically way lower than what you would think or budget for.
Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, with that question, we need to end today's webinar. I want to thank all of our panelists for sharing their insights, and thanks to you, our audience, for attending. Goodbye to all, and have a great day.